It's strange how some nights never fade, even when years have passed. The memory of that one still lingers in the corners of my mind. The smell of antiseptic, the echo of hurried footsteps, the faint hum of machines whispering through sterile air. My name is Rebecca Hale, and I've been a nurse for almost 2 decades. I've seen life begin, and I've watched it quietly slip away. But there was one night, one patient, that made me question everything I thought I knew about death. It was late in the fall of 2013. A storm had rolled in over St. Mary's Hospital in Ohio, the kind that made the lights flicker and the air feel charged. I was working the night shift in the operating room, trying to stay awake on my second cup of coffee when the trauma call came over the intercom. The tone in the charge nurse's voice made my stomach drop. 42-year-old male, cardiac arrest, en route. ETA 5 minutes. The patient's name was Michael Torres. He had collapsed suddenly at home while playing with his kids. Paramedics had gotten a pulse back for a brief moment, but then another arrest on the way in. When he arrived, there was chaos. Controlled, familiar chaos. We moved like a single organism. Gloves snapped, monitors beeped, the defibrillator whined. Every second mattered. The surgeon barked orders and we followed instinctively, our training taking over where emotion dared not go. I remember glancing up at the monitor, a flat green line. No rhythm, no life. But none of us stopped. There's a rhythm to resuscitation, a desperate kind of music that nurses and doctors know by heart. 1 chest compression, 2-3. Charging to 200, clear. The body jolts. Nothing. Increase to 300, clear. Still nothing. The silence after a failed shock feels louder than any alarm. Minutes stretched into eternities. The storm outside roared against the windows as if trying to remind us how small we really are. Sweat gathered beneath my mask, and I could feel my hands trembling slightly. Michael's skin had grown pale, almost waxen. I could see his wedding band glinting under the harsh surgical lights, and for a split second, I thought about the family waiting for him, somewhere unaware of what was unfolding here. After 40 minutes, the attending physician shook his head. Time of death, 3:17 a.m. The words fell like stones into the quiet. I pulled my gloves off slowly, my mind numb. A fellow nurse whispered beside me, barely audible. He's gone. For a moment, no one moved. The team began to clean up, the hum of machines winding down, the room's energy dissipating into an eerie calm. And then, something in me hesitated. I remember looking at Michael one last time before turning away. The fluorescent lights flickered again, casting strange shadows across his still face. I didn't know it then, but that night, that very minute, something impossible was about to happen. Something that would defy every medical law I'd spent my career believing. Years later, I can still hear that storm. I can still feel that chill when I think about what came next. Because what we witnessed after 3:17 a.m., what we all saw, remains the most haunting moment of my life. People often imagine the operating room as cold and mechanical, a place of scalpels, bright lights, and silence. But to those of us who work there, it's something different. It's alive. It breathes. Every person in that space, the surgeon, the anesthesiologist, the scrub tech, the nurses, moves in rhythm, each heartbeat syncing with the monitors, each breath echoing the ventilator's steady hiss. Inside the OR, there's no room for hesitation. Every move is deliberate. Every second counts. I've spent most of my adult life in that room. 18 years of watching the fragile balance between life and death play out beneath my hands. The outside world doesn't exist there. There's no sunrise or sunset, no sense of time. Only the pulse, the numbers, and the hope that they'll hold steady. We live for the moments when they do, and we grieve quietly when they don't. That night, Michael Torres was our patient, a healthy 42-year-old father of 2, no major medical history, no warning signs. One moment he was laughing with his children, the next he was gone. Cases like his unsettle everyone. They remind us that life doesn't always give reasons, that sometimes it just stops. When the ambulance doors burst open, we went into motion. The team's coordination felt almost instinctive, like a dance we'd done 1,000 times. The surgeon's gloved hand raised for a scalpel, the anesthesiologist calling out vitals, the suction machine whirring, the crash cart at the ready, defibrillator pads placed, chest compressions continuous. The monitor traced a thin, unwavering line. No heartbeat, just a sterile, green whisper of silence. Charge to 200, clear. His body jerked, then fell still. Nothing. Again, 300, clear. Still nothing. Sweat rolled down my neck as I counted compressions, feeling the ribs shift under my palms. You learn to separate your mind from your hands in moments like these, to focus on mechanics, not meaning. But that night, something about it felt heavier. 40 minutes passed. I saw it in the surgeon's eyes, that moment when hope starts to fade, replaced by exhaustion. We've all seen it, that quiet surrender that comes after you've done everything. I felt it too, a hollow ache growing in my chest. Michael's pupils were fixed. His skin had taken on that unmistakable stillness, the kind that even the untrained can recognize. But even as the attending pronounced him, I couldn't shake a feeling that something wasn't quite finished. The air in the OR felt strange, dense, as though the storm outside had crept in through the walls. I remember the static in the air prickling against my skin, the hum of the lights faintly flickering above us. It felt like the room itself was holding its breath. We disconnected the machines one by one, their beeping tapering into silence. The surgeon removed his gloves. Someone muttered a quiet prayer. And in that moment, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and loss, I realized something. In this place where science reigns supreme, there are still things we can't measure. Still moments when the line between life and whatever comes next blurs in ways we can't understand. When time of death is called, something inside you shifts. It's like the whole room exhales at once, not out of relief, but resignation. There's a heaviness that fills the air, a kind of finality that even the steady hum of the machines can't drown out. For us that night, it was 3:17 a.m., when the attending surgeon finally said the words. We all stopped moving. Gloves were stripped off, monitors silenced. The rhythm of urgency gave way to an unnatural stillness. I stood there, staring at the man on the table. Michael Torres, 42 years old, husband, father, son. His chest was still beneath the harsh light, his skin pale and waxy, a thin sheen of sweat cooling under the air conditioning. I'd seen death before too many times, but this one felt different. I can't explain why. There was something in the room that didn't feel finished. We began the ritual cleanup, moving methodically, as if the routine could anchor us in something rational. I wiped the stainless steel tray clean, the cloth squeaking faintly against metal. The storm outside rattled the windows, thunder rolling in the distance. A few of us exchanged quiet glances, not words, just looks that said we tried. And then, it happened. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A flicker of light on the heart monitor. A soft beep, faint but unmistakable. I froze, staring at the screen. The flat line shuddered. Once, then again, like a heartbeat trying to remember itself. "Doctor," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Look!" The surgeon turned, irritation flashing across his face, ready to dismiss it as a monitor glitch. But the line moved again. A small, tentative blip, then another. A rhythm. "A pulse. Check the leads," the anesthesiologist barked. It could be artifact. But it wasn't. The line steadied. The beeping grew stronger, faster, rhythmic. A heartbeat. Michael's heart was beating again. For a moment, no one spoke. Then chaos, stunned, disbelieving chaos, erupted around the table. "Get vitals! Resume support! Oxygen back on!" We scrambled like it was the first second of the code, not the 41st minute after it had ended. The attending stared at the monitor, his lips pressed into a thin line. I could see it in his eyes. Disbelief. We confirmed what none of us could process. Spontaneous cardiac activity after 20 minutes of confirmed asystole. That should have been impossible. After that long without oxygen, brain function ceases. Cells begin to die. But Michael's heart, His heart was beating, strong and steady, as though nothing had happened. The air in the room changed again. The charge nurse later said she felt her skin prickle, like static before lightning. For me, it was a sudden warmth, a pulse that seemed to move through the air itself. I glanced at Michael's face, and that's when I saw it. A single tear sliding down his cheek. He was still intubated, still unresponsive. But that tear, glistening under the surgical lights, stopped me cold. I remember whispering, "He's crying," even though I knew it couldn't be possible. The anesthesiologist shook his head, muttering something about reflexes, but I wasn't convinced. There was something in that room I could feel, but not name. We worked quickly to stabilize him, rechecking vitals, adjusting medications, ensuring oxygen flow. The attending kept repeating under his breath, "This doesn't make sense." And he was right. It didn't. When Michael was finally transferred to the ICU, the OR fell silent again. The team dispersed slowly, still shaken. I lingered a little longer, my gloved hands trembling. The monitor was still on, that steady heartbeat echoing softly through the room, the sound of something we had already declared gone. That night, standing alone under the fluorescent lights, I realized I had just witnessed something medicine couldn't explain. And to this day, no chart, no scan, no lab result has ever convinced me otherwise. 2 days after that night, I walked into the ICU expecting another routine check. Michael Torres was still under sedation, his vitals finally stable, the machines surrounding him humming in a delicate harmony. The attending physicians were cautiously optimistic, though no one dared say the word miracle. Medically, his brain should have been gone. 20 minutes without a heartbeat leaves no room for recovery. But there he was, alive. When I checked his chart that morning, I remember whispering to myself, "You weren't supposed to be here." I don't know if I meant it in fear or gratitude. Maybe both. That afternoon, I was standing beside his bed when it happened. His eyes fluttered. Just a flicker at first, the kind of reflex we sometimes see in coma patients. But then his head turned slightly, his eyelids lifting. His gaze was unfocused, hazy, but there was awareness there. He was awake. I called for the attending, and within seconds the room filled with movement again. Monitors being adjusted, orders shouted, nurses double-checking his responsiveness. He blinked slowly, taking in the light, the noise, the faces hovering above him. And then, through the dryness of his throat, he whispered something that froze every drop of blood in my body. "I saw you crying." The words were faint, broken by the oxygen mask, but I heard them clearly. My chest tightened. I hadn't told anyone about that moment, the one after we'd called time of death. I had turned away from the table and wiped a tear from under my mask. Just one. Silent, private. There's no way he could have seen it. I remember stammering, "What did you say?" He looked at me weakly and repeated, "You were standing by the table. You were crying." His voice trembled, like he was recalling a dream he didn't quite understand. Over the next few days, as he grew stronger, he began to share more. He described the operating room, the arrangement of the instruments, the color of the surgeon's gloves, the smell of the disinfectant. He even mentioned a surgical clamp that had fallen onto the floor, something that happened after he had flatlined. Every detail was accurate. Impossible, but accurate. I sat with him one afternoon while the rain drummed softly against the window. He told me that after everything went dark, he found himself floating above the table, watching the team work frantically over his body. He could see us from above, detached, calm, as if the panic below couldn't touch him. He described the feeling of peace, warmth, light, not blinding but endless. "It wasn't like anything here," he said softly. "It felt familiar." When I asked him if he remembered anything else, he nodded. "There was a voice," he said, eyes fixed somewhere distant. "It told me, it's not time, and then everything hurt." I felt myself pulled back like falling through water. Then I opened my eyes. His wife stood beside me, her hands trembling as tears filled her eyes. Even the attending physician, usually stoic, looked pale. I'd spent my career relying on science, structure, logic. But that conversation cracked something open inside me. Or maybe it unsealed something that had always been there. I realized that for all our skill, all our machines and medicines, we don't own life. We only borrow it for a while. As I left the room that night, his words followed me. I saw you crying. And I knew whatever had brought him back wasn't something I could chart, explain, or even fully believe. But I felt it. Deep down, I knew. In the days and weeks that followed, word of Michael Torres's survival spread quietly through the hospital. Among nurses, it became the story whispered in break rooms, the case no one could quite let go of. Doctors tried to explain it, of course. They always do. That's what medicine is built on. Explanations, data, cause and effect. But this time, none of it added up. I sat in on a case review a week later. Around the table were some of the most respected physicians at St. Mary's, a cardiologist, a neurologist, and a researcher from the university who specialized in near-death physiology. Charts were projected onto the screen, showing every vital, every lab, every second of Michael's resuscitation. According to every metric, he should not have come back. His brain activity had been flat for more than 20 minutes. There was no residual oxygen, no reflexes, no spontaneous movement, and yet he woke up without neurological damage. The neurologist cleared his throat, explaining something about post-mortem electrical surges that sometimes, in rare cases, dying brains can fire off random bursts of energy. The cardiologist added that perhaps microscopic pockets of oxygen had persisted longer than we thought. Another doctor mentioned chemical floods like DMT that might create vivid hallucinations during death. I listened, nodding politely, but inside, I couldn't reconcile their theories with what I had witnessed. It wasn't just that Michael came back. It was how he came back. The tear on his cheek. The things he said he'd seen. The detail in his description. These weren't the scattered flashes of a failing brain. They were memories. Precise. Grounded. Impossibly real. Later, I read every study I could find about near-death experiences. Hospitals in the UK and the US had conducted trials placing hidden images above operating tables. Images that could only be seen from above, to test if patients who left their bodies could later describe them. Some could. Others recounted conversations and details confirmed by staff, despite being clinically dead at the time. Science called it anomalous awareness. I called it something else. When I spoke with the neurologist again, he smiled kindly and said, "Rebecca, we have to be careful. Our brains are storytellers. They fill in gaps. Maybe he was right." But then he added, "Still, cases like this remind us how little we truly know." Those words stayed with me, because even in the most sterile, rational corners of medicine, there are cracks, tiny fractures in the wall of certainty where something larger seems to shine through. And maybe that's the truth none of us want to admit. Science doesn't fail when it meets the unexplained. It just reaches the edge of what it can measure. And beyond that edge, something else waits. Something that breathes in the silence after the heartbeat stops. After Michael's recovery, nothing at the hospital felt the same. For weeks, I went through the motions, charting vitals, prepping rooms, scrubbing in, but something inside me had shifted. Before that night, I'd thought of medicine as an equation. Symptoms plus intervention equals outcome. But now, every time I stepped into the OR, I felt the weight of something unseen hovering. Between the sterile lights and the pulse monitors, a reminder that we weren't in control. As much as we wanted to believe, I found myself whispering small prayers before every code, something I'd never done before. Not prayers for miracles, but for mercy, for peace, whichever way the case went. When patients slipped away, I didn't just think of failing hearts and silent monitors anymore. I thought about where they were going, and if someone, somewhere, was whispering to them, "It's not time." For a while, I avoided the operating room entirely. I volunteered in post-op recovery, told myself I needed a break. But the truth was, I was afraid. Not of death, but of what I didn't understand. The memory of that tear on Michael's face haunted me. I'd see it in my mind when I closed my eyes at night, that single glint of light sliding down his skin. I started meeting with the hospital. Chaplain after shifts, just to talk? He listened quietly, never interrupting, until one evening he said, "You don't sound frightened, Rebecca. You sound..." Humbled. He was right. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was reverent. Months later, I finally saw Michael again. He'd made a full recovery, walking, talking, laughing with his wife and children. He looked like any other patient being discharged, except for the way he met my eyes. There was an understanding there, an unspoken connection between us. When I approached him, he smiled. "You were the first face I saw when I came back," he said softly. My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him how impossible that was, how his eyes had been closed the entire time. But I couldn't. Instead, I found myself saying, "I didn't bring you back, Michael. Something else did." He nodded, and we didn't speak again. Some truths don't need words. That night, driving home under the glow of streetlights, I thought about all the people I'd lost on that same operating table. The ones we couldn't save. I used to think death was the end of the story. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe, just maybe, it was only a chapter break, a pause before something greater begins. Since that night, every time I walk into the OR, I still feel that electric hum in the air. The same one I felt at 3:17 a.m., the moment Michael's heart began to beat again. It's the sound of something eternal brushing against the edge of science. Quiet, invisible but impossibly real. It's been more than a decade since that night, and still it lingers, like a shadow at the edge of memory, never fully fading. Sometimes when I walk through the corridors of St. Mary's just before dawn, I feel it again. The soft hum of the monitors, the distant footsteps, the sterile brightness that hides 1,000 quiet miracles and heartbreaks. Hospitals never sleep. They just breathe. In, out, the rhythm of life itself. I often find myself sitting by the window in the break room, watching the first light spill across the parking lot. That's when I think about all the faces that have passed through these halls. The ones who lived, the ones who didn't, and the ones, like Michael, who came back from somewhere we can't name. His case changed how I see everything. I still believe in medicine, in science, in the incredible skill that saves lives every single day. But I've learned that there's another layer, something beyond numbers and data, something that can't be charted or contained in a diagnosis code. Every nurse carries ghosts. Not the kind that rattle chains or whisper from dark corners, but the kind that live inside you. Memories that flicker whenever you hear the low tone of a heart monitor or the sharp call of a code blue. I used to fight those ghosts. Now I listen to them. They remind me that we are not machines. We are fragile, temporary, and yet somehow touched by something infinite. I remember visiting Michael one last time before he was discharged. The sunlight fell across his bed, and he looked stronger, peaceful. As I turned to leave, he said quietly, "Tell them there's more than this." His voice was calm, sure, as if he had seen something so beautiful he couldn't put it into words. I promised him I would. Sometimes, when I tell his story, people ask if I think what happened was divine, if I believe he actually saw something beyond. I don't give them an answer, because maybe the point isn't to explain it. Maybe it's to feel it, that brush with the unexplainable that reminds us how precious every heartbeat really is. In medicine, we're taught to measure everything: heart rate, oxygen, time of death. But there's one thing we can't measure: what happens when those numbers stop. I've seen the body die, but I've also seen something rise, something unseen, untouched, unbroken. And maybe we're not supposed to understand it. Maybe it's enough just to know that it's real.